And this event is going to be recorded. It's being recorded right now, actually. So when it's finished recording, it'll be placed on this YouTube channel. So we have a YouTube channel. It's called Black History Walks. In fact, let me just show you the title here. It's called youtube.com/Black History Walks. And it has about 200 plus different short to long videos on Black history in Britain in particular. And they cover anything from fibroids to British slave owners to Black British civil rights to Tudors. There's a massive amount of resources there. And this lecture from Professor Salenius will be placed onto this website in a couple of days' time. So if you've missed it or you have a friend who wants to watch it, they can just click on this link here, youtube.com/Black History Walks, and they can watch it for themselves. Excuse me. So today we're looking at this amazing lady, Sarah Parker Remond, and we're having this event on this Friday because next Friday we're going to unveil a plaque in her honor. So Sarah used to live in Grenville Street, which is not far from Russell Square Tube Station, and we've got U.C.L. and Royal Holloway University London to kind of sponsor this plaque, and we're going to unveil this plaque to her next Friday at 12 o'clock until about 2 o'clock. So it's going to be some music. There'll be several speakers, including Professor Paul Gilroy. And we're going to talk a bit about who Sarah Parker Remond was then and have a plaque unveiling too. And that's a free event. You can just come along. All you do is register. If you're not based in London, you can't get there physically, we're going to have a Zoom link, which will definitely work because we're testing the events. We'll have a Zoom link for the event. So if you want to come and you can't actually physically get there, you can just register for this free event and we'll send you the Zoom link in advance. So that's the event we're going to look at today. We're going to hear about her from Professor Salenius, so I'll just skip this part. But let me tell you a bit about Professor Sirpa Salenius. Lectures at the School of Humanities, Foreign Languages and Translation Studies at the University of Eastern Finland. Her interest in English language and culture center on American literature and culture as well as transatlantic studies. Her research focuses on issues related to race, gender, and sexuality from the 19th century to the present. She's lived and worked in France, Japan, Italy, the USA, and Finland. She's the author of An Abolitionist Abroad, Sarah Parker Remond in Cosmopolitan Europe. And that's the book you should get. If you're really interested in Sarah Parker Remond, that's the book to get to find out about her amazing life story. But without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Professor Sirpa Salenius. Over to you, Professor.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Warner, for your extremely kind presentation. And if you give me permission to turn on my video.
Yes, let me fix that little problem right now. So give me 2 seconds.
I will.
1, 2, 3. Right, you should be able to do that now.
Let's see. Yes, here we go. So thank you so much for this extremely kind introduction, and thank you for the Black History Walks for organizing this event. And I take this opportunity also to thank Professor Paul Gilroy and Kaisa Karhu, and of course all of you in the audience who are interested in learning more about Sarah Parker Remond, who, as you mentioned, was an exceptional woman, superheroine, and an abolitionist and women's rights activist. And it's my great honor and immense pleasure to talk about her. And I'm really thrilled about University College London's decision to dedicate a research center to her. And I'm really excited about the plaque that will introduce and celebrate Sarah Remond, because she really deserves this recognition. So let me just share my screen here. Okay, so I hope you can see it.
Yeah, it's all good. It's good.
Thank you so much. Good. So I will start this presentation by quoting Sarah Remond. She wrote in her autobiographical essay, which was published in London in 1861, about her education in the segregated United States and how she and her siblings were repeatedly refused entry to or expelled from schools in Salem because of their race. So she wrote, "I thought of the great injustice practiced upon me and longed for some power to help me crush those who thus robbed me of my personal rights. Great injustice, robbing Remond of her personal rights, a powerful way to address discrimination. As she contributed to social and political change, Sarah Remond was in the core, not in the margins, of transatlantic women's emancipation and anti-slavery movements. In Remond's view, hatred of her race stemmed from prejudice and intense ignorance. Remond herself was well educated to a great extent at home. She was born in Salem, Massachusetts on 6 June 1826. And this is her passport application, US passport application, dated 8 September 1858, when she was ready to travel to Europe. And it's the only document that I have been able to locate that actually states her date of birth. There are 2 Salem, Massachusetts censuses according to which she would have been born either in 1824 or 1826, but other documents for the most part tend to support the information found in this passport application. So Remond family lived at Hamilton Hall, which was located in Salem, Massachusetts, where the father worked as caterer. And the Remonds were relatively prosperous entrepreneurs who were active in political life. They were abolitionists who campaigned for desegregation, race equality, and women's emancipation. Sarah was the youngest but one of 10 children of John and Nancy Remond. The father, John Remond, or Sir Remond, as some of his friends called him, was originally from the West Indies. And according to some scholars, his mother was free-born African of French origins, and his father was Dutch Jewish. When he arrived in the United States, he was just a boy, about 10 or 12 years old. And scholar Sybil Brownlee states that according to custom records, his last name was recorded as von Remond upon his arrival in the United States. And I've been speculating that the American pronunciation of the family's last name, Remond, may perhaps derive from an American pronunciation of this name, von Remond. But according to Sarah's sister Caroline, their father was of French origins, born in 1801. Perhaps this, then, is why the last name would be pronounced Remond. Whatever the case may be, he was a caterer and an influential figure in the Salem Black community, a cultured leader, and a member in the New England Anti-Slavery Society. He was involved in establishing a Black church, and together with his son, Charles Lennox, he led protests for desegregating schools, and they submitted petitions to repeal laws banning interracial marriage. John Remond, or Remond, was not only Salem's famous caterer, but he also traded pickled lobsters, oysters, fine wine, and champagne. The family also had an ice cream salon and other business ventures, all centrally located in Salem's prominent business areas. And John Remond oversaw the preparation of important dinners at Hamilton Hall. And here's the menu for a dinner served on the 200th anniversary of the first settlement of Salem. As you can see, there were first and second course dishes, jellies and preserves, probably to go with them, and then pastries and desserts. And another dinner he was involved in organizing was in honor of Joseph Story, an American lawyer and judge who served on the Supreme Court of the United States from 1812 to 1845. He was the father of the artist, sculptor, William Wetmore Story, who resided in Rome, Italy, starting from 1850. And it is possible that he introduced Sarah Remond into the expatriate American circles when she moved to Italy in 1866. And another important dinner John Remond organized was in honor of Marquess de Lafayette during his visit in Salem in 1824. For the dinner, he took care of not only the food, but also the table linen and flowers. So the Remond family members were determined to change society. They campaigned for racial integration and equality, desegregation of schools, and they recognized the importance of education. In 1835, the family moved to Newport, Rhode Island, where the parents hoped the children could attend a private school in a less racist environment. But the schools refused to accept Black students. As a response to such discrimination, some influential African Americans established a private school where Sarah Remond was admitted. Her determination to fight against injustice was taking form when she was still a girl, eager to be educated, recognizing that learning was her right. As she later wrote, quote, "American prejudice against freeborn men and women is as deep-rooted as it is hateful and cruel," end of quote. In 1841, the family was back in Salem, where John Remond resumed his business activities. But more than the father, it seems that it was the mother who was influential in Sarah Remond's life. So Nancy Lennox was born at Newton, 7 miles from Boston. In her autobiographical essay, Sarah describes her mother as, quote, "a woman possessing every characteristic which can adorn and ennoble womanhood, combined with the most indomitable energy," end of quote. Nancy Remond was a baker and fancy cake maker, also one of the founding members of the Salem Female Anti-Slavery Society, which was established in 1834. She taught the children to knit, sew, and to cook, insisting that everything, no matter how trivial, should be done well. Her aim was to guard and at the same time strengthen her children, not only for the trials and duties of life, but also to enable them to meet the terrible pressure which prejudice against color would force upon them, Sarah wrote. Sarah's brothers, John and Charles Lennox, were both politically active, and Charles in particular was influential in the anti-slavery movement. In 1842, he addressed the Massachusetts state legislature to protest racial discrimination on railroads and steamboats. And together with Frederick Douglass and other Black abolitionists, he helped recruit African-American soldiers into the Union Army's all-Black Massachusetts 54th Regiment. He was involved in the Underground Railroad, and the family home was a resting place for fugitive slaves. And the sisters, Nancy, Susan, Cecilia, Marisha, and Caroline, were financially independent, successful businesswomen who operated the Ladies' Hair Work Salon, where they worked as hairdressers and manufacturers of wigs, and they ran a bakery. And they were also active abolitionists and promoters of women's rights. And unfortunately, I have not been able to find any photos of them so far. The Remond children initially were taught to read and write at home. Sarah was an avid reader, as she recalls in her autobiographical essay, quote, "I found the most exquisite pleasure in reading, and as we had no library, I read every book which came in my way, and like Oliver Twist, I longed for more," end of quote. In Newport, she had access to public libraries, and she read novels, poems, but also newspapers. She wrote that these were resources of which even prejudice could not deprive me. Reading was an excellent way to train her for a future career as a lecturer. She became an eloquent speaker when she joined her brother Charles on abolitionist lecture tours. Charles Lennox had become active in the transatlantic anti-slavery scene when he traveled to England with William Lloyd Garrison to attend the First World Anti-Slavery Convention in London in 1840. He was one of the first to tour in England, Scotland, and Ireland, raising awareness of the horrors of slavery. He was instrumental in introducing many who traveled after him to local activists, which facilitated the organization of their lecture tours. Also among those attending the London Anti-Slavery Convention was Lucretia Mott, who together with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who at the time was in England on her honeymoon, would organize the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848 to discuss women's rights. At the London Convention, women were not allowed to take part in the meeting, but could listen from the spectators' gallery. Charles Lennox, out of solidarity with the excluded women, joined them in the gallery. In 1856, Sarah Remond joined her brother Charles as a speaker for the American Anti-Slavery Society, touring in the United States between 1856 and 1858. And this image is taken later when she was already lecturing in England. But when she first appeared on the platform talking against slavery, newspapers right away commented on her powerful talks, for instance, from Ohio in 1857. I very much admired the spirit of the speakers. Sarah P. Remond acts well her part. She's modest and retiring in her address, but speaks words of thrilling rebuke and appeal in the ears of Northern mothers. The sensation is great wherever she goes. Already at the start of her career, she addressed her talks specifically to women. A Black woman on the platform was a novelty, and the activists capitalized on her, as is evident from a letter the abolitionist minister, who was the author Louisa May Alcott's uncle, Samuel May, wrote to another activist, Elizabeth Buffum Chase, observing that, quote, Sarah is quite a pleasing speaker, and the novelty of a young colored woman appearing as a speaker will be likely to be attractive, end of quote. This novelty Sarah Remond represented was of gender, race, and age. Sarah herself observed that the audience at their anti-slavery lectures was closely packed. She often spoke with her brother or with others, most of them white abolitionists, and many of them also women's rights activists, such as Susan B. Anthony, Abby Kelly Foster, Parker Pillsbury, and others. They spoke in New York City, Rochester, Utica, Montreal, and toured various states, New England, Michigan, and Ohio. In December 1856, they were in Ogdensburg, New York, where Sarah and Charles Remond were denied entrance to a boarding house. So Susan B. Anthony refused to remain there without them. In 1858, Remond, whose career as a public speaker advanced rapidly, made an appearance at the National Women's Rights Convention in New York. Sarah Remond fought against discrimination in many ways, raising awareness of the injustice of racial segregation and the violation of her rights. For instance, in 1853, she was planning to attend a performance of Gaetano Donizetti's opera Don Pasquale at a Boston theater, the Howard Athenaeum, located in Scollay Square, that served as Boston's major entertainment center. At first, it featured opera and theater, later vaudeville and minstrel shows. So Sarah, together with her sister Caroline, and the African-American author, journalist, and publisher William Cooper Nell, who wrote articles for William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator, had bought tickets by mail to be seated in a box. But when they entered the lobby of the theater, they were told to sit in the gallery, which was reserved for Black Americans. Since they refused to obey, they were offered a refund for their tickets. But as local and international newspapers later reported, as far away as in Scotland, they refused to listen to any compromise, after which the manager gave orders that they be removed from the theater. As a result of being pushed out, Remond's dress was torn and her shoulder injured. The party sued the theater and won $500 in damages. According to the verdict, the manager had failed to state in his advertisements that Black Americans would be excluded from that section of the theater. It appears that as a strategy to contest segregation, Remond probably provoked certain situations so as to draw attention to discriminatory practices. In December 1858, Garrison wrote that Remond was ready to leave for England, where she might continue speaking against slavery. She had so long been interested in the anti-slavery movement that she was thoroughly posted upon all the matters pertaining to it. Of Remond, Garrison said that she was comparatively new in the lecturing field, but only needs practice to become a pleasing and impressive public speaker. Her appeals are to the conscience and the heart, and always made with dignity and earnest conviction, Garrison wrote. He further explained that Remond would head for Liverpool, not representing any society, but, quote, identified by complexion and destiny, by sisterly sympathy and generous philanthropy with the millions in this country who are punished worse than white criminals for the color of their skin, end of quote. When preparing for departure, Remond wrote that I hope to reach London before winter, but I dread starting for many reasons. I do not fear the wind nor the waves, but I know that no matter how I go, the spirit of prejudice will meet me. But in England, British anti-slavery activists received her with warmth and kindness. Remond sailed on the ocean steamer Arabia, probably not this, but a Cunard Line vessel, arriving in Liverpool on January 9th, 1859. For African Americans and women, travel often equaled freedom and formed a dramatic contrast to the confining, segregated, and gendered spaces that silenced and oppressed them. Remond had an intense desire to visit England, she wrote, that I might for a time enjoy freedom. She also hoped to serve the anti-slavery cause and obtain a good English education. Parker Pillsbury had written to a friend of his in Liverpool to meet Remond there. She immediately started addressing crowded meetings in Liverpool and Warrington on the subject of slavery, and was hailed as a colored lady of great powers of speech. She also instigated the formation of new anti-slavery societies, for instance, one in Warrington. Others who were lecturing in England, Ireland, and Scotland around the same time included such fugitive slaves as Frederick Douglass. At times, for instance, in December 1859, Remond and Douglass appeared together. They both spoke at the Leeds Young Men's Anti-Slavery Society event, where they talked about John Brown's raid of Harper's Ferry. And other Black Americans who were in England around the same time included William and Ellen Craft, William Wells Brown, and Henry Box Brown, who, as many of you may know, had escaped slavery by having himself shipped in a wooden box from Virginia to Philadelphia. The Crafts often appeared together with William Wells Brown. As for Remond, right from the start, her powerful lectures generated such excitement that not only the seats, but also standing room were quickly exhausted. Her speeches boldly addressed the dehumanizing of the enslaved. To quote Remond, "The slaves are essentially things with no rights, political, social, domestic, or religious. There are 800,000 mulattoes, 9/10 of whom are the children of white fathers, and these are constantly sold by their parents, for the slave follows the condition of the mother. Hence, we see every shade of complexion amongst the slaves. We have states where I'm ashamed to say men and women are reared like cattle for the market." She also talked about corrupt American politics, discrimination of American Blacks in northern cities, where hotels and local transportation refused Black men and women, and where despotism crushed their intellect. She talked about sexual exploitation of enslaved women, a topic that other speakers and even newspapers preferred to avoid. P. Gabriel Foreman affirms that sexual abuse of enslaved women was neither visible to the law, nor did it elicit public stigma for its perpetrators. But Remond boldly asked her audience, "What is slavery?" and answered, "In the open marketplace, women are exposed for sale, their persons not always covered. They are exposed for sale and subjected to the most shameful indignities. The more Anglo-Saxon blood that mingles with the blood of the slave, the more gold is poured out when the auctioneer has a woman for sale, because they are sold to be concubines for white Americans. They are not sold for plantation slaves. Women are the worst victims of the slave power," she concluded. Numerous newspaper reports that were published in the United States and abroad all spoke highly of Remond, praising her remarkably feminine and graceful appearance, quiet, dignified manner, a well-toned voice, and pleasing style of enunciation, and her exceedingly impressive and delightful talks. They tamed her presence on the platform, publicly speaking about the horrors of slavery. The Dublin anti-slavery leader, Richard Webb, praised Remond as really very clever, the most so of all the colored people I ever met, except Douglas. And she's a very much more sensible and thoroughgoing person than he. Her success was guaranteed. In England, she felt accepted, as she wrote, quote, "I have been received here as a sister by white women for the first time in my life. I have been removed from the degradation which overhangs all persons of my complexion. I have received sympathy I never was offered before," end of quote. But in November 1859, her citizenship was questioned when she applied for a visa that would allow her to travel from London to Paris, France. Remond, like other African Americans, all of whom were not recognized as legal citizens, carried a substitute passport. And when Remond walked into the office of Benjamin Moran, the assistant secretary of the U.S. legation in London, her request for visa was denied on the grounds that she was a person of color. In his journal, the U.S. representative wrote that, quote, "Had she sent the document, I should have visited." But Remond came in person, which meant that he could see that she was, quote, "a dark mulatto with woolly hair." She evidently expected a refusal and was so impudent, he wrote, that he had to order her out of the house, end of quote. And Remond responded, first by writing to the legation that she did not expect such an answer from one whose salary she contributes to pay. She then wrote letters explaining the incident addressed to editors of various newspapers in Edinburgh, London, New York, who were scandalized by the discrimination. They all condemned the US legation's incivility, and many published a copy of the passport, which attested that Remond was a citizen of the United States. The news fell like a bombshell on Moran. Still 3 months later, he was thinking of the incident. To quote his journal, "I am reminded that the Queen looked at me very scrutinizingly on Thursday, and I now suspect the Remond affair was dancing about in her mind, and that she wished to know what kind of person the secretary was that refused that lady of color a visa." Perhaps Remond again provoked the incident, then drew attention to the question of citizenship. It seems that she then traveled to Paris, returning to England, where she had started her studies at Bedford College. In October 1859, she had written from Warrington to Maria Chapman of her plans, quote, "On the 12th of this month, I go to London to attend the lectures at the Ladies' College. I shall, on every occasion that I can, still continue to lecture and do all I can for our cause," end of quote. The founder of Bedford College in Bedford Square was Elizabeth Jesser Reed, a proto-feminist, philanthropist, supporter of the anti-slavery cause and unification of Italy. The college was founded in 1849, and at the time, It was the first higher education institution for women in the United Kingdom. There, women could study subjects that commonly were considered suitable for men rather than for women. Many of the professors who taught there also held positions at University College London, which, similarly to Bedford College, was non-sectarian. Many early students at the college campaigned for women's suffrage, educational rights, and women's property rights. In 1852, Mrs. Reed had opened her home on 6 Grenville Street as a boarding house for the students who attended the school. And in 1860, Remond lived there while studying at the college. The college records indicate that during the 2 years Remond studied there, from October 1859 to June 1861, her courses covered such topics as ancient history, arithmetic, reading, geography, French, Latin, and vocal music. In the first year, it seems that she started a systematic course of study aimed at obtaining a degree as stipulated by the Committee of Education that required between 5 and 7 subjects. But during her second year, she had dropped many of the courses, attending classes only modern history, English literature, and French. A handwritten note in the college register indicates that the other classes were found to be quite unsuitable owing to the peculiar circumstances and age of the student. At the time, Remond was over 30 years old, and she was still lecturing. After completing her studies, Remond moved to board at the Aubrey House, where she lived from December 1861 until at least October 1864. It was the home of Clementia Taylor and her husband, Peter, a member of Parliament, and one of the central gathering places of London radical reformist circles. Remond, who connected with the activists gathered around the Taylors, was involved in establishing the Ladies' London Emancipation Society in 1863. She was also one of the executive committee members of the society, as well as a pamphleteer. The Taylors participated in the 1866 petition for women's suffrage, and nearly 1,500 names and addresses that were collected during the first 3 weeks of the campaign were attached in a long scroll at their Aubrey House. Among those who signed was Remond, perhaps the only Black woman to have signed the petition. Another one to sign the petition was Frances Power Cobb, also a friend of Elizabeth Jessy Reed and committee member of the Ladies' London Emancipation Society. Cobb was an influential suffragist, journalist, and social reformer who dedicated her time to workhouse reform, to improve women's legal status and opportunities for higher education. Remond, who stayed with Cobb during a visit to Bristol, had met her in Dublin in August 1861 at a National Association for the Promotion of Social Science meeting of early proto-feminist activists. At that event, Remond delivered a paper on American slavery and its influence on Great Britain. Many discussions at the conference revolved around women's education and medical reform. It is through the Taylors that Remond met Giuseppe Garibaldi and Giuseppe Mazzini, whose efforts resulted in the unification of Italy. Mazzini, who was a friend of the Taylors, was in exile in London. Remond assisted with fundraising bazaars, but also became a friend of Mazzini's, with whom she went to the opera in London, and she carried with her letters of introduction from Mazzini when she moved to Florence, Italy. And one of the first people Remond went to see upon her arrival in Florence was Garibaldi, who was in the city only for 2 days at the time and still received Remond. So Remond was connected to and respected by the protagonists of many movements. She was right at the center of radical change that was taking place at the time, change that included abolitionism of slavery, universal suffrage, and unification of Italy. At this time, as the two reference letters accompanying her request to study at the Santa Maria Nuova Hospital School in Florence reveal, she was studying in the departments of midwifery and surgery at London University College, graduating as a nurse. The recommendation letters were signed by Sister Rosmonda from the All Saints University College and M. Berkeley Hill, one of the head surgeons at the University College London. Both praise her skills, energy, untiring attention, and kindness toward the patients under her care. At the conclusion of the American Civil War, Sarah Remond left London, traveling to Florence, joining other Americans, most of them white, most of them members of the elite, on their journeys toward acculturation and self-realization. Painters like John Sargent, or sculptors like Harriet Hosmer, authors like Henry James, Mark Twain, and many others resided or visited Italy around the same time as Remond lived there, searching there for material and opportunities to express their creativity. The museums and galleries of such Italian art capitals as Rome and Florence were the greatest attractions. Florence was a cosmopolitan hub and an intellectual center known for Renaissance art. And Remond was among the few Black women who traveled to Italy in the 19th century, creating a rupture in the dominant white transatlantic narrative. Sarah's sister, Caroline, had already been living in Florence and Rome since 1859. She left for England in 1866, soon after Sarah's arrival in Italy. Remond traveled to Florence as a British subject. Peter Taylor and James Stansfield, both members of Parliament, were among those who had supported Remond's naturalization application in 1865. Stanfield's wife and her sister, Matilda Ashurst-Biggs, were also activists fighting against oppression on many fronts. The British naturalization documents state that Sarah Remond's residence was London, and her intention was to reside permanently in the UK. She was granted the certificate of naturalization as a British subject, and she received her passport in 1867. So she was then already in Italy. She then applied for license to be absent in January 1868, was granted 6 months. She then applied for another extension, which she was granted as well. But the documents state that it was to be the final extension. Since she remained in Italy, it seems that she lost her rights to be a naturalized British subject. But it seems to have been a conscious choice to give up her British citizenship, because by then she had already completed her studies. But it was in August 1866 that Sarah Remond had first arrived at Firenze la Bella, as it was known among foreigners. Florence had just become the second capital of unified Italy after Torino. So prices had gone up, and it was rather difficult to find accommodation. Remond established herself at Casa Iandelli, a centrally located, respectable pension, pretty much across the river from in this picture. And she wrote that she was not here in Florence for pleasure, but for study. And indeed, she soon enrolled in one of Europe's most prestigious medical schools, the Santa Maria Nuova Hospital School. Her request to be admitted to the school, dated 30 October 1866, was written in Italian. And she explained that she lived in London, but was planning to spend the winter in Florence. Her name appears among the students admitted to the Department of Obstetrics at the hospital for the academic year 1866-67. So the first year she was auditing classes, after which she took the entrance examination that permitted her to continue her studies. She passed the test with top marks. She had now moved to 8 Via Santo Spirito, which is close to the church of Santo Spirito and not far from the Pitti Palace. But she was also traveling during this time. In March 1867, she was staying with the Taylors in London, and in May of the same year, she was in France. William Lloyd Garrison wrote to his wife that, quote, "Sarah Remond called to see me the other day, but to my great regret, I was absent. I am to see Sarah tomorrow forenoon. She does not fancy Paris and will return to London next week," end of quote. So from London, she returned to Florence to continue her studies. The hospital school documents reveal how she Italianized her name to Sara, which may indicate an identification with her peers who were all Italian, and her assimilation into the local society. She had accentuated her last name, which would indicate its pronunciation in Italy, Remond, with emphasis on the first syllable of the name, which differs from how it is commonly pronounced in the United States. In July 1868, she had completed her studies and practical work and requested to be admitted to take the final examination. In consideration of her exemplary conduct when auditing and attending classes and the practical work she mastered, the school reports state that they were in favor of letting her take the examination, despite the fact that she had attended the school for 8 out of the 16 required months of study. She then took the practical test on Tuesday, 4 August, 1868, and the habilitation examination a week later on 11 August. It is highly probable that she, again, passed the examination with excellent marks. American newspapers confirmed that after a regular course of study and also of hospital practice, Remond had recently passed the necessary examination and received a diploma for professional medical practice. So Sarah Remond was exceptional in many ways. She excelled in her intellectually demanding studies, then in her profession, first as a lecturer active in political life, then as a doctor, and she was linguistically talented. She had studied Latin and French and was now fluent in Italian. And in Italy, where she was surrounded by history and culture, she became more than a cultural tourist, skillfully navigating through the tensions of being ambitious and talented, being woman, being Black, and being in a foreign country. Her professional prospects in Florence were good, as testified by American newspapers that also noted that she goes among the best people in Florence, notwithstanding her cuticle is tinted. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton's newspaper, The Revolution, identified Remond as a highly gifted colored lady and confirmed that Miss Remond is said to be not only well received everywhere in Florence, but she has friends among the very best people there. She knew the already mentioned Giuseppe Mazzini and the Greek author Margherita Mignati, who held a salon on Via Cavour, and she knew poet Francesco da Longaro and the American art collector James Jackson Jarvis, among many other prominent people visiting or residing in Florence. And among them was the American poet, translator, and Harvard professor Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who returned to Florence with his family in 1868. And Longfellow Pierce wrote in her journal that Longfellow, quote, went to a musical party at Professor Del Ongara's where he met a lady of color from Salem, Massachusetts, very intelligent and agreeable, studying medicine in Florence, end of quote. Remond continued to follow the events taking place in the United States, occasionally publishing her letters in various newspapers. For instance, in a letter written in Florence in 1866, addressed to the editor of London Daily News, she pointed out that slavery in the past and its hateful remnants in the present were the reason why people were determined that the Black race shall not be recognized, shall not receive justice. No one, she wrote, who has kept pace with the history of the colored race can hope to re-educate a nation at once. Therefore, the only remedy is to check this hatred, made up of fashion, prejudice, and intense ignorance. These words have not lost their meaning since the day Remond wrote them. Remond's integration to Italian society intensified through her marriage to Lazzaro Pintor, an office worker and later a painter from an upper-class family in Cagliari, Sardinia. Remond defied conventionality, marrying an Italian who was 6 years younger. And here Remond actualized her family's political vision of cross-racial marriage. According to the marriage certificate dated 25 April 1877, Sarah Parker Remond was 50 years old, placing her year of birth to 1826, and she was a housewife. Remond was also a member of the local reading room and library, Cabinet of Vieux, where other American members included the author Henry James, sculptor Hiram Powers, travel writer Bayard Taylor, and famous people from other parts of the world, for instance, the author Dostoevsky from Russia. Remond's address here is indicated as Via Garibaldi, which was a fashionable part of the Italian capital. Remond's sister, Caroline Remond Putnam, and her son, Edmund Putnam, were also members of the lending library at various times when visiting Remond. So Edmund Putnam had married a British white woman, Gertie Agnes Elliston, in May 1868. According to the marriage certificate, Edmund at the time was a medical student. Some sources indicate that he was studying medicine in Vienna, but the medical school records there have no mention of him. Later on, he was writing articles for newspapers. He would travel with his wife to France, back to England, to Italy, where they visited Florence, Rome, and San Remo, and at times they would be vacationing in Viareggio, a fashionable Tuscan seashore resort. And together they organized international interracial events while living in Rome, one that was attended by two British travelers, Anne and Matilda Lucas, who met Sarah Remond there. To quote Matilda Lucas, "The music was first rate, chiefly from professionals, Scambati, Tosti, Pinelli, all well-known names here. The Black Aunt was there, elegantly dressed in lavender silk. The performers were among the most celebrated and fashionable musicians of their time. Giovanni Scambati was an Italian composer and pianist who helped launch the singer Paolo Tosti toward fame. And Ettore Pinelli was a Roman violin virtuoso. The choice of music and Remond's elegant silk dress testify to her sophistication and fashion consciousness. Music, which was socially relevant, here is representative of Italy, of its culture and national character, an important element in social connectedness, as Paul Gilroy has suggested. In Rome, the Putnam couple ran a hotel, Palazzo Moroni, located next to St. Peter's, where Frederick Douglass was their guest during his extensive tour of Italy, France, and Egypt. He traveled with his second wife, Helen Pitts, in 1887. In Rome, he had lunch with the Remonds, Sarah, Caroline, and Maricha Remond. Douglass wrote that it was very delightful to meet this charming circle of Massachusetts people away off here in the city of Rome. Like myself, the Remond sisters, with the exception of Caroline, have grown quite old, but in all of them, I saw much of the fire of their eloquent brother, Charles. 2 days later, Douglass made a visit to see the African-American sculptor, Edmunia Lewis, who was also residing in Rome and had loaned Helen some books. To quote Douglass, "Here she lives and here she plies her finger in her art as a sculptress. She seems very cheerful and happy and successful. She made us obliged to her for kind offer to serve us in any way she could, and she certainly seems able to serve us in many ways. She has resided in Rome 20 years and constantly speaking Italian has somewhat impaired her English." End of quote. Like Remond, Lewis was fluent in Italian, marking her assimilation into her adoptive home, where she was working on statues that often bore a political message of Black liberation and gender emancipation. Although Lewis's early patron, Lydia Maria Child, had written in 1866 that, quote, looked at in the light of art, nothing she has produced is worth a second glance, end of quote, Lewis proved her wrong. The Dodgeville Chronicle identified her as the only colored sculptress in the world, and other newspapers reported how, despite her youth, she conferred honor upon the American Department of Art and received the highest honors of her calling. She won a gold medal and diploma for her early statues exhibited at the International Exhibition of Sculpture and Paintings at Naples. And British lords and ladies became her clients. And like Remond, she was part of the international cosmopolitan culture social circles. She liked to attend the opera, just like Remond, and she often heard the musician and composer Franz Liszt play at his villa near Rome. The Villa d'Este in Tivoli at the time was about 3 to 4 hours out of Rome, and it was a cultural center for Roman society. Lewis, who was a friend of Liszt, made a medallion of him. And I bring this up because Sgambari was a student of Liszt, so perhaps Remond attended these soirees as well. More than once, Lewis told American newspaper reporters that she was treated very kindly in Rome. Together, Lewis and Douglas traveled to Naples, where they toured museums and other cultural sites. Douglas wrote that they had a bird's eye view of pictures, statuary, and many objects of interest taken from the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Douglas also visited Pompeii, Amalfi, and Salerno before returning to Rome. Douglas then reported that Madame Remond Pinter lived in 6 Piazza Barberini, which was a central location. And right along the piazza, there was the famous Tritone fountain created by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Murray's travel guide, A Handbook of Rome and its Environs from 1888, listed Edmunia Lewis among the sculptors working in Rome, indicating that she was also located in Piazza Barberini. And another artist who for a time lived in Piazza Barberini was William Wedmore Story, the son of Associate Justice Joseph Story of the U.S. Supreme Court from Salem. He was well connected to the local expatriate society and may have introduced Remond and her family to other Americans living in Rome and Florence. And here is also an image of Story's Angel of Grief, a funeral monument created for his wife, Emmeline, at the non-Catholic cemetery of Rome. Edmund Putnam's wife, Gertie, is also buried in the same cemetery in Rome, where her funeral monument praises her as a woman with a kind soul and beautiful heart, di anima gentile, di cuore bello. She's interred in the old section of the cemetery, not too far from Emmeline's Story. Edmund Putnam seems to have then remarried with another British woman and lived in England until 1914, after which he moved back to the United States. Her mother and sister of Remond, Caroline Putnam, moved to England, where she became a British citizen in 1889. According to some sources, she lived close to Hyde Park at 35B Clanricarde Gardens, sorry about that, Bayswater Road. But according to her own testimony, she lived at Euston Square, Oxford Terrace, and on 99 Ladbroke Road, Holland Park, Notting Hill, London, which in the 19th century was a fashionable suburb of the capital with large houses and private gardens that attracted wealthy Londoners. Sarah Parker Remond, who remained in Italy until the end of her life, is buried at the non-Catholic cemetery for foreigners in Rome. According to this certificate, she passed away on 13 December 1894. Her residence at the time of her death was Florence, and her profession, according to this certificate, was surgeon, medico chirurgo. She seems to have still been married to Pintor. And when Pintor passed away, he was indicated as a widow of Remond. So to conclude, Sarah Parker Remond was truly an exceptional woman, a superheroine who resisted conventional readings of 19th century Black women. As Sarah Clay, who had been involved in establishing the Lowell Female Anti-Slavery Society in Massachusetts, had written in The Liberator after hearing Remond's lecture in 1858, Sarah Parker Remond certainly possessed a mind of no ordinary culture and a heart deeply imbued with every high and noble sentiment. It seemed to me, Clay continued, as I sat and heard her, especially in the evening, that her every sentence must have thrilled each human with an almost envious admiration and have waked up dormant aspirations which would vibrate through the ages. End of quote. As a protagonist in American and British abolitionist and women's rights campaigns, Remond participated in the making of transatlantic history. And in England and Italy, she was exposed to culture in a way that was not accessible to many 19th century Black women. With ease, she moved between cultural capitals, lived in London, Florence, and Rome, visiting Paris more than once. She challenged white cultural superiority, and the beauty of the example she provided for other Black women resided in the limitless opportunities she envisioned, then actualized, using her full potential. And with her international travels and activism, she offered an empowering narrative of the African-American experience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Professor Salenius. That was fascinating. So much information in there. It's a bit mind-blowing, really. We're going to take a few questions. So Professor Salenius has given us about 10 minutes of time on this Friday evening in Italy to take a few questions. So if you have a question for the professor, just type it into chat. So if you've got any questions, you've got 10 minutes to ask the questions, type the question to the chat box or the Q&A box and we'll ask that question. I'll start off with myself. Professor Salenius, what profile does Sarah Parker Remond and indeed Edmund Lewis have in Italy itself? So how are they perceived? How are they recognized, if so, if at all, in Italy, Sarah Parker Remond and Edmund Lewis?
Actually, I'm still looking into this. You know, of course, they like many Americans who were in Italy at the time, they very much socialized with other Americans and the British, or these international circles. And as far as I know, Sarah Remond was very accepted in these circles, and she knew also musicians, among them Franz Liszt and so forth. And then, of course, through her friendship with the people like Mazzini, she was introduced into the radical circles, even intellectual circles in Florence. But I have not really found many testimonies of how people perceive them. So there are some comments, for example, at the reception where these two British women met her, where a German visitor made a rather racist comment about her. And then sometimes they were not invited to receptions at the American embassy in Rome, for example, when other Americans were invited there. So because of their race, obviously they were excluded from these events. But I haven't really found that many comments about them. So,
yeah. Does Italy have a Black History Month?
Yes, they do. They have. It's actually not really in Italy, but there's an American who is organizing like a Black History Month events. So it's not like an official thing that stems from Italians themselves, But it's been celebrated, and there are these events, and I think for Italians, when they think of Black, they think of fascists. So there's this this sort of a resistance in a way to perhaps for some to take part in something that for them may mean something different.
Okay, you got two questions asking you, how did you come across or find out about Sarah Parker Remond in the first place?
Okay, well, I was organizing this workshop on African-American women and literature and travelers here in Florence, and I was thinking of a presentation topic for my own presentation, and saw a mention of Sarah Remond, who had lived in Florence, and so of course I was very intrigued about this woman. There weren't that many publications that I could find, and not much material on her at all. So the little that I found, then I prepared my presentation on that. But then I got really curious about the medical school documents, and it took me quite a long time to locate them. But the sensation when I actually was able to find them and see them and see her name in these binders that probably had not been opened after the 19th century, the feeling was, of course, incredible. So.
Dawn's asking, do you know her cause of death?
I don't. I'm trying to locate her, because I'm not sure. I'm still looking into this. I know the hospital where she presumably passed away, and so I'm trying to find the archival documents for that hospital, so that I could also find out if she perhaps worked there. So I'm still digging in Rome.
Okay, and there is a plaque in her honor in Rome, is that correct?
There is a plaque, yeah, at the cemetery. Yes.
Okay. Sevilla says, do you know if she had any children?
No, as far as I know, she did not have any children. She was already 50 years old, as I mentioned, when she married. And so as far as I know, she didn't have any children.
Okay, do you know if she met Florence Nightingale or Mary Seacole during her time in London? That's from Wendy.
I don't know. I'm sorry to say, and it's very possible that she may have met them, and not necessarily in London, but perhaps in other places as well. So, but I haven't found any indication of that.
I got a question from G. Leslie. Was Remond best received in English, French, or Italian society? Where did she suffer the worst disrespect?
You're excluding here the United States.
That's a good point.
So I'm not sure if there was much discrimination against her in any of these countries where she participated. She was very warmly welcomed in the activist circles in all of these places, and also became friends with with these international intellectuals and artists in England, in Italy, both in Florence and Rome, and I'm still looking into her stays in Paris. So I'm trying to find more information about those circles there and how much she was involved in the society and the activists there. I know that she attended an anti-slavery convention in Paris, but I don't have much more information.
The question here is, do you know if she gave speeches in Italian and in French in those countries as well?
As far as I know, no, because well, I'm not sure about this anti-slavery convention in Paris, although it seems that she was attending it kind of like a last minute thing. So when she came to Italy, she already moved on to other things. So she wasn't really lecturing against slavery at that point any longer. So, but she may have given talks about medicine or something. So that's possible, but I'm not actually sure if she would have been lecturing here or giving talks. Yeah.
You got a question from Phyllis about how many images are there of Sarah Parker Remond? Is it just two? Are there more than two, or do you know?
I've only found these two images, and I'm hoping that I will get to see more. I have it's for some time now that I've been I'm in touch with the family of her husband, so Pintor, and so hopefully in April we will finally be able to look at the documents that they have, and they told me that they probably have a photograph, but because of COVID, they have been blocked in one place. I've been blocked in another place, and travel has been very difficult. So we've been trying to get together for a few years now. So I'm hoping that I will find some material there.
Okay. Well, speaking of documents, I'm going to see if I can. Hold on a second. Got another question here. Wait. Hold on a second. Yeah, so let's go and find the image of the plaque unveiling. Just give me 1 second. I'll see if I can pull it up. Yeah, I think I've got it here now. And then we're going to let you go, Professor Salenius. I have to say thank you again for your time and your contribution and that massive amount. In fact, your book. Can you just remind us of the title for your book and how long it took you to write that book, please?
Yes, as some of you know, archival research is really difficult. It's very time consuming. And so these documents that I have included, some of them are in the United States, some of them are in Florence, some of them are in Rome. So United States, England, different parts of England, and so forth. So now, of course, you find more material online, but it's extremely time consuming, and I really didn't have much time. And I was not really planning to write a book about her. But I found the medical school documents, and so I published an article, and I thought that's it. But then I started looking into her connection with James Jackson Jarvis, and found a batch of letters that her nephew and his wife had written, and so they talk about the reality of these African Americans in Italy, and so I felt like I had to do something with those letters, and so I started writing this book. And it was I didn't really, as I said, I didn't really have time to write it, but I really wanted to get the letters out, and so it didn't take as much as it could have and should have. And I'm presently working on a book and dedicating more time to this book. And it's about Sarah Remond and Edmunia Lewis, and then these other African Americans who were in Italy and France and England in the 19th century. So one of them is also Sally Mercer, who was the assistant and head of the household of the American actress Charlotte Cushman. So there were quite a few of these. And before I go, I think there was a mention or a question about something about why do we talk about these women as exceptional? Did I see something like that? The chat or questions? Sorry about this, but
yeah, there was a question a bit like that.
Yes, it's exceptional. Yeah, because they really were exceptional. Not only exceptional as Black women, but women in general, or even 19th century travelers in general. They were really they had the courage and the means and the vision to create these incredible lives for them, and they were not limited by the society, because the society, of course, oppressed African Americans and women very much. So Sarah Remond has given me, for example, so much courage, and she really is an example that I try to follow because of this strength and power, which is exceptional. So I just wanted to add that. It's
okay. So just to clarify, your next book, you're working on a book of Black American expats in Italy who are all part of the freedom fighting, anti-racist, equality kind of campaign. Is that right?
Yes.
Ah, that sounds fantastic book to
Yes.
look forward to. And actually, just remind us, what is the title of your book on Sarah Parker Remond, please?
Okay. An Abolitionist Abroad, Sarah Parker Remond in Cosmopolitan Europe.
All right, cool. So on the screen in front of you, this is the website where you're going to find this recording. So this talk has been recorded and it'll be shared on this YouTube channel. So the YouTube channel is titled youtube.com/Black History Walks. So you just look for youtube.com/Black History Walks, and there's a couple hundred videos there, including in about 2 days' time, the Sarah Parker Remond lecture you've just listened to. And speaking of Sarah Parker Remond, now over here, this is the plaque, which will be unveiled next Friday. So next Friday, this will be unveiled in real life, real physical conditions, 25th of March, 12 o'clock. If you want to come along, just register for free on this Eventbrite page. And if you can't come physically, we'll send you the link so you can actually watch the the unveiling yourself from the comfort of your own home. But at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much to Professor Salenius for her time and energy, her research and her dedication. And thanks to the audience for popping in, logging on to our little session here. And we will hopefully see you in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. All right, bye for now. This stream will switch off in about 5 minutes flat, or switch off in about 5 minutes flat. Thank you.